So I'd like to start off by welcoming everyone. Thank you for being here. You may not have known, but we have a special appearance today, which I think is very special, especially to me. Gautam, Sachdeva, is a very close friend of mine, and we met in Mumbai in 2005 when I first started going to visit Ramesh. We both have a great appreciation for the teaching. We both share from our own experience the teachings that Ramesh put forward. And whenever I get the opportunity to sit and share in this format, given our close friendship, I think it's something that I'd like to share with as many people as possible. So Gautam is in town at the same time as me. We did this last year as a joint satsang. It's on YouTube if people would like to watch that after listening to this. And it was well received, so hopefully people won't be disappointed that it's not just me up here. But for the remaining 8 or 9 days, it will be just me. And having said that, I remember Gautam giving a very nice introduction last year about... I'll leave it to him. Maybe he'll repeat himself.
Actually, in Hindi, there's a saying which is kebab mein haddi, which basically means that you're enjoying a nice juicy kebab and suddenly a bone gets stuck. And that's what I am, because y'all have come to see Roger and I've been placed here next to him. So I'm the quintessential kebab mein haddi. But I'm leaving tomorrow, so you will be saved the grief in case you don't enjoy it today. Or let's take something more relatable. It's like a guy sees this girl he really likes, and he thinks he's got her, and then another guy comes on the scene. But that's not going to happen beyond today.
Yeah. Because we do have this strong connection, which is Ramesh, I have the sense that we might talk a little bit or a lot. I'm not sure about Ramesh and the teachings that I put forward are, as I see it, Ramesh. But maybe we'll have some specific stories about our time with Ramesh. And on that note, I thought that we could theme today's talk with essentially what is the theme of the whole teachings, and that is Thy will be done. So we really haven't had much discussion about how we'll handle this. So we're doing okay so far.
So as Roger said, I think two overarching themes of Ramesh's talks were that everything is God's will, and if you don't like the word God, you could replace it with the source or consciousness or what is. But basically not your will. Everything is God's will in that sense. And the other is the Indian philosophy of Advaita, the peg of which is non-doership, that nobody is the doer. So my personal experience was that this is everybody's life experience. You only have to look at your own life to understand what he's saying. You don't need to read the scriptures, because the scripture of your own life will reveal to you these truths. And that is what I did as my personal experience. When the first time I heard him say everything is God's will, I thought he was really stating the obvious. Because I lost my father when I was 14. And I completely knew it was not my will. It was an event which happened out of my control. And so my journey began very early. That events happen. That was how it began for me. And so I feel that it is literally everyone's journey of life. The teaching is so simple, as Ramesh would say, the teaching is so simple that you just don't get it. You know, or as Walt Whitman said, the truth is simple. If it was complicated, everyone would get it. So beauty in simplicity, that is what he would say all the time. Beauty in simplicity, and the teaching may not make life easier, but it will certainly make it simpler. That is what we picked up when we were with him over the years. And he was a living example of that. I once asked him that every day you wear a white kurta pajama and come to the talks. Very simple, like a grandfather figure. Just a white kurta and pajama. And he replied, he said, not only do I find it most comfortable, but when I wear just white, then there's no projection. Then I know that people are coming not for me, but for the teaching which comes through me. It was as simple as that. As if he disappeared into the background and the teaching was foremost. And the net result, you could say, of the understanding, I recall Ramana's words which really impacted me deeply, that the most powerful siddhi, supernatural power, is to be in a state of calm. Nothing else matters. And when the thinking mind, which is the cause of the disturbance, which goes all the time into a dead past or an imaginary future, when that is stilled, calmness is who we are. It needn't be acquired. It is our natural state. And this is what we picked up. The annihilation of the thinking mind of the ego with its sense of doership. And as Ramesh would say, we all know that life is imprisonment. We are imprisoned in this form. We all are here because deep down we know that life is imprisonment. But what we do is we convert what is simple imprisonment into rigorous imprisonment. In Goa, there used to be a hairdressing salon, and I think the name of that salon summarizes the teaching. It was cut the crap. That's what happened. Could there be a bigger gift than that?
So, at the beginning of each talk, Ramesh would emphasize a very particular point. He would encourage seekers who have been seeking possibly for 30, 40, 50 years to be very clear for themselves as to what exactly they are seeking. He would encourage, you would think it's common sense. However, he would encourage this emphatically because it was blatantly obvious to him, having seekers come through the doors day after day, that this questioning, this focus, hadn't happened and was leading to a lot of the confusion that existed amongst the seekers. So this ties in with what Gautam has just mentioned. He mentioned the end of the belief in personal doership, which on the surface should also be common sense given a quick investigation of our own life experience. So why is a recognition of non-doership so essential? So we go back to this point that Ramesh would start the teaching with. Ask yourself, what is it that you are really seeking? And he would encourage the question to be asked on the practical daily living level. So in practical terms, what is it that you're really looking for? If as seekers we don't understand the importance of this question, the reason it's asked, then our seeking is really going to labor itself and splinter off into all sorts of directions. So it turns out that human beings, when we observe our actions and the actions of others, are convinced that happiness is to be found in the form of outcomes. People are continually seeking change in their life with the hope and with the expectation that when my life changes, when there is pleasure, pleasure, pleasure in my life, I will be happy. We just need to observe our own movement through life to confirm that actually my current expectation is that I am looking for happiness through outcomes. A better job, a soulmate, a nicer neighbor, maybe enlightenment. And that is part of the problem. We can call that attachment to outcomes. And it means that we are heading in a particular direction, and it turns out that it's completely the wrong direction. Now, Ramesh saw that in spiritual seekers, the same dynamic seemed to exist, in that there was an idea about what enlightenment was that was off mark. So hence this question, what is it that you're really looking for? And if we were to provide an answer like the word enlightenment, he would say that's not much use, because what does that mean? Do you have a good definition of what enlightenment is? Is it really an answer that will help you in your seeking? So the answer he would put forward as the concept within the teaching, which is not an answer that he would encourage people to believe, but rather an answer for you to investigate to see if you agree with it and whether you will take it on as an answer that you really, truly understand to be the right answer. He said, whether you realize it or not, the human being is really looking for happiness, but that happiness is available in a very specific form. Not happiness through pleasure, not happiness through outcomes, but happiness through continuous, unbroken peace of mind in daily living. That was essentially Ramesh's definition of enlightenment. What we are looking for, whether we realize it or not, is happiness. But the happiness that is available to the human being on a continuous, unbroken basis is happiness in the form of unbroken peace of mind. And I'll repeat again, that's what he defined enlightenment to be. So enlightenment equaled happiness. But happiness in a very specific form. Continuous, unbroken peace of mind. And because he didn't want a word to be the answer, he would define what peace of mind is. Peace of mind, very simply, is the absence of something, not the gaining or addition of anything, the absence of suffering. And because, once again, these are concepts, so it's a word, the absence of suffering. Let's define suffering. Ramesh would define suffering. Suffering is an uncomfortableness with yourself, with the other, with life. Ultimately, all an uncomfortableness with oneself. He wasn't talking about the uncomfortableness of the sun shining on you too brightly, or the uncomfortableness of a hard bed, or the uncomfortableness of cold showers. He was talking about an internal uncomfortableness, an uncomfortableness with oneself. And in practical terms, that uncomfortableness with oneself and the other arises in the form of guilt, blame, pride, worry, and expectation. Those are the 5 broad headings of the suffering. So, if that concept is received by us, and we investigate it, and we agree with it, and our attention keeps coming back to that, what I'm really looking for, what is available to the human being on a continuous, unbroken basis is happiness in the form of unbroken peace of mind. Then so much of what Gautam and I will share starts to make sense because we can relate it back to continuous, unbroken peace of mind. So at first, the peace of mind is not going to be continuous and unbroken because the suffering is going to keep arising from time to time as we go through life, and the suffering arising is what breaks, disturbs the peace of mind. But as the suffering starts getting less and less and less, what you're left with is this background where you can continue to live life. You do continue to live life, doing whatever is necessary in the circumstance. The body functions automatically in the circumstance. And the suffering is no longer disturbing the background of peace. And as Gautam said, so simple. The truth is most seekers are not ready to hear this because they're so attached to outcomes. Put a certain type of seeker in the room and they'll leave very quickly because what we've suggested is not very appealing. The absence of suffering. The scriptures understood this, so they decided to play a little trick and call it Ananda, bliss. It keeps those that aren't ready to really face a clear investigation of their own and admit or recognize that it is just peace of mind that's available. The notion that what we're looking for or what is available is bliss will keep people interested enough until such time as they realize that bliss is not something that you can live with 24 hours a day. It would become ordinary. You'd want a higher bliss. It would become normalized. If you're seeking something, a special state, think about it and wonder whether the same dynamic of attachment to outcome has just switched over and is now seeking a spiritual something. So I'll leave it at that for now and let Gautam pick up on the non-doership maybe, so that it can become clear why the emphasis is on non-doership and what that really means. Why is it important to talk about non-doership, to investigate, to point at this dynamic of doership and talk about the fact that that dynamic can fade away? Always remembering these pointers, these concepts are useful because they support a framework that ultimately is only interested in bringing about change for one reason. So everything that is spoken about specifically because it relates to the topic of happiness for the human being. And that happiness is unbroken peace of mind. So whenever you hear something, ask yourself, why is this being said relative to peace of mind?
One of Ramesh's favorite sentences was the Buddha's line which said, samsara is dukkha and nirvana is shanti. The world is misery and nirvana is peace, not bliss, peace. And that is why he would in jest say, the Buddha is my friend. So, what the beauty of the teaching is, this peace becomes your priority. One-third of your life, you know it, because in deep sleep there is peace. So this teaching points back to that peace. And these very two basic tenets, everything is God's will and nobody does anything. There was a sage in the early 1900s, perhaps the most famous in India, called Shirdi Sai Baba. So he would tell some devotees of his that if you have difficulty with people and in relationships, what I suggest you do is every time someone is in front of you whom you don't like, you replace their image with mine. And then talk to them, and then argue with them. And his serious devotees took this on as a sadhana, as a practice. And they were transformed. Ramesh put it across extremely simply. An example which I don't tire to use because it's so understandable. As he would say, that each gadget in the kitchen is designed to produce something specific. The juicer will produce juice, the toaster will produce toast, and so on. But without electricity, they are dead objects. And what we look at is objects designed to produce certain outputs, ignoring the fact that the same electricity runs through all of them. That is what is the Maya. That is the illusion. That the same electricity functions through all of us, and each one of us has been shaped by factors completely beyond our control. The parents we were born to, their income group, their location, how they treated us as children, our genetics, our blueprint, and our conditioning, which started from when we were a baby. And on the basis of this, we grow and grow and grow, and there's more conditioning and more conditioning. And on the basis of this, we take decisions, we take action, and then we claim it is my action. I decided to do something. But when you investigate, you understand that this so-called my action and my decision were based on factors completely not in my control. And then you realize, so too for the others' decisions and actions, especially the ones you don't like. They too were shaped by their genetics, their conditioning, the way God made them, the way consciousness made them, you could say, whichever word you're comfortable with. But the recognition that just like you have your own flaws, so to speak, so do others. When this is recognized in relationships, whether it is your closest friends, relatives, colleagues at work, or the stranger on the road, and this is recognized, then that sting of doership is removed from the relationship. All the blame, condemnation, hatred, all that has no place anymore. The cartwheels of the thinking mind. That is what happens with this understanding that truly nobody does anything. Life becomes simpler. Another thing one realizes is that everything appears in consciousness. It may appear that I am speaking to you, but isn't this voice arising in your own consciousness? Can this voice arise outside your consciousness? When this understanding starts sinking in, the play of life is seen. Whatever arises, which now looks as separate people, individuals, the ones you like, the ones you don't, it's all arising within consciousness. That is actually the true unity of life. The ones you dislike the most are within your own consciousness, not apart. And Ramesh would always emphasize that it is through relationships and understanding relationships that the teaching reveals itself.
if you were to hold up a different priority to peace of mind, a lot of what we're talking about might sound like a whole lot of intellectual, conceptual nonsense. If you hold up a priority of experiential oneness, for example, what I mean by a conceptual priority means if your expectation is that what enlightenment is the dissolution of the person, the dissolving of the individual into a new state that no longer includes duality, then that's what your efforts will go towards waiting for and trying to achieve. At some point, hopefully life comes in, delivers some information and says, in practical terms, isn't the problem the judgment towards the other, the blame towards the other, the guilt and shame towards oneself, the pride for one's good actions, which is the opposite of the shame towards the actions that happened through me that delivered pain or negative outcomes. So at some point, life might come and say, isn't what is important the dissolution of this psychological thinking mind that essentially creates a separation on the psychological level between me and the other, a separation that makes the other my competitor and rival, my enemy in some cases, and a story that continues almost continuously in life because there is always a circumstance happening. Life is interhuman relationship. And so with this attitude of personal doership, there is always a judgment on the other or oneself if the belief in doership is rigidly in place. And ask yourself maybe whether the states of oneness are appealing, because when they happen, if we follow certain guidance through spiritual teachings, could it be that that guidance is being given because in order for an experienced state of oneness to happen, the thinking has to stop? A state of oneness, when it kicks in, doesn't happen simultaneously to blame and hatred and judgment. If you could have the peace which is available when peak experiences happen without the peak experience, would you not take that?
I would like to add something here about experiences. When we were young in school, we had the roll call. I don't know if you all had it in your school. At the beginning of the class, the teacher would read out the name, and when your name came, you would say present. Now with the peak experiences, what we want, which we don't realize, is that we are in that class, and when our name is called out, we say absent. We want to be there to say we are absent. Because the peak experience has happened to me, and therefore I want to repeat it. So that is why peak experiences can lead one astray. And our Guru would use a very nice term for experiences when they came unasked. He said they were free samples. Free samples. Not to be sought, you may not get it again. But when they come as a gift to show you that they came not because of your doing, they came because of destiny. So experiences of oneness, experiences of this, experiences of that. There can be layers upon layers upon layers of experience. I think this is enough of an experience, just being here now. And that is why the emphasis on peace, Sukha Shanti. The hidden treasure that can be seen everywhere is peace. The focus has always been that. And that is why when Ramana Maharshi was asked, how do I know whether a sage is a sage? His answer was extremely simple. He said, by the degree of peace that you feel in his presence and the sense of respect that you feel for him. He didn't say anything else. He didn't say that he had to have gone through the 7 levels of samadhi and this and that. By the degree of peace you feel in his presence and the sense of respect you feel for him. Sorry, please continue.
Actually, I think I had stopped for you to take over, so very good. The teaching is very much structured as a framework, a conceptual framework that I have a tremendous respect for, because every single time I thought I knew better, and there were a few, I was proved wrong. Until after it happened enough times, I surrendered to the power of this framework that came through Ramesh. It's something that the framework matches anything you'll find in the scriptures going back thousands of years ago, but it is framed and structured in a way that suited Ramesh. He said, I've been a banker. He ended his career as the managing director of the Bank of India. I've been a banker for 40 years. He said, as a banker, you have to be practical. And so my seeking followed, this is Ramesh speaking, my seeking followed a practical path, a practical investigation, because I had been a seeker for many years, having various family gurus, and I wasn't given the answers that I needed. I asked practical questions from time to time, and sometimes those questions that Ramesh felt were very valid questions to ask were answered in ways that didn't give him practical answers. So he said, I decided when I retired to investigate what this search for happiness was for myself, using my own life experience as the laboratory. And so the framework that is put together is one that is practical, and Ramesh, not out of pride or arrogance, was always very impressed at how clear it was. Now, he wasn't saying, look what a good job I have done as the doer of this teaching. Far from it. The whole everywhere through the teaching, is the understanding that we are not doing anything, that whatever happens through us is a happening. And Ramesh was continually impressed at the clarity of the teaching as it would come through. So when I look at the teaching, it is a framework, a conceptual framework that he delivered consistently, day after day, in order for the various concepts to start sinking in, so that we had something to take with us into daily life. A framework that would start kicking in automatically, not requiring you as a seeker doing seeking. It was encouraged that once you left satsang, you had no more work to do. You don't have any homework per se. Just go out and live your life. But that was said with the understanding that the way that we are in each moment is a result of how life has formed us up to that point in time. And sitting in satsang was a form of new conditioning. So Ramesh would say, make no mistake, what is being put forward here is just new conditioning. So this notion that spiritual seeking sometimes puts in, that, oh, what has to happen is that I need to become unconditioned. The problem is conditioning. And it is the conditioning that needs to fall away. That's never going to happen, thankfully. I can assure you, if you pray for the end of your conditioning, and God obliged, you would have some problems in life. Speaking is based on conditioning. Eating is based on conditioning. Knowing how to wash yourself is based on conditioning. Conditioning isn't the problem. It's a very specific type of conditioning that has inserted a very specific set of beliefs or outlooks about life. And that specific segment of conditioning, the segment which is being referred to here as the doership and attachment to outcomes, that is the conditioning that causes the resistance to life in the form of guilt and blame and pride and worry and expectation, attachment to outcomes. And so Ramesh would remind us that what is put forward in satsang is simply new conditioning. It's conditioning that isn't typically out there in the world. It's very much in this part of the world. But typically, if you are living your life in a Western city going to work, you get the completely opposite conditioning to what's put forward in satsang. So, having said this, that what is put forward is simply new conditioning. The human being at any point in time is a result of their genes and up-to-date conditioning. And the up-to-date conditioning is continually changing because of the addition of new conditioning. And in satsang, the new conditioning is such that it has the potential to completely uproot the segment of our existing conditioning that causes our resistance to life. So, why do you have no homework when you leave? Because you will be a result of your genes and up-to-date conditioning when you leave the talk. So you will function according to your makeup at any point in time. And so the conditioning is thrown out. It will land one way or another. And we're not in control of how it lands. I have no control on how the new conditioning takes hold inside of you, and frankly, nor do you. It may well be thrown out and slide right off and have no effect. In effect, we can say it doesn't change anything. Or it lands and you find yourself walking through life, coming across someone that doesn't move out of your path and forces you into the road and you almost get hit. And the thought arises, how dare that guy? Where is the respect in that man? And on that story goes. And at some point a thought might arise and say, this is blame, which is disturbing the peace of mind that was there when the blame wasn't there. And the blame is based on the seeing that person as a separate, independent entity that is in control of everything that they think, say, and do. So, if that thought arises, a thought that recognizes the blame for what it is, that thought arises because of your genes and up-to-date conditioning. And you don't have to do anything. If someone goes out saying, okay, now today I have to understand what was said, yes, that means that who is trying to understand it is the ignorance that life has inserted as sort of a default mechanism. So no one has done anything wrong. The suffering is not a result of you doing something poorly. The suffering, when it arises, is an impersonal happening, meaning it happens because of impersonal factors. The deeply ingrained conditioning that life has put in place. If life has put it in, if you had the choice, you'd say, okay, none of that rubbish conditioning, thanks. But we don't have the choice. It gets set in place. And if that deeply ingrained belief that I am a separate, independent entity and I have complete choice over the thoughts that I have, over the words that I say, over the actions that I perform in life. If that's the deeply ingrained way that we see ourselves, then we have to see the other the same way. We will see the other the same way. And if that's in place, hatred towards the other, blame towards the other, shame and guilt towards yourself is inevitable. It's not optional. So I wouldn't go around suggesting that you try to accept anything in life. It's mission impossible to accept what the other does when there is the deeply ingrained belief in personal doership. If the deeply ingrained belief in personal doership is there, when the other does something that delivers pain to you, you have to hate them. It's just a psychological reaction based on the circumstance and your outlook on life. So inserting the added pressure on yourself to accept is just giving us something else to feel like a failure about. And if life dissolves that ingrained belief in personal doership, it's as impossible to hate someone when they deliver the pain to you. Because the dynamic that used to be there, that was the source of the blame and the hatred, simply isn't there. So what's being described is the fact that we are biological and psychological instruments moving through life, designed by life to be a particular way, functioning in each moment a particular way. Like two chemicals that are a particular way. They didn't choose to be that way. They were designed by life to be a chemical. And they come in contact with each other. And a reaction will happen depending on their particular makeup and how that makeup reacts when it comes in contact with. They don't sit and debate how they're going to react. It's an impersonal happening. And if we can start to see that the human being is a very complex biological and psychological instrument placed in life, and life is continually delivering stimuli, circumstance, and there is a continuous reaction inside the human being, biological and psychological. And that will change in accordance with the change that happens in the body. According not to my will or your will, but according to how life changes us. So hopefully over the next 8 days, we can go through the framework. We've started touching on it. And as it's repeated over and over, hopefully the new conditioning starts to become ingrained. You find yourself moving through life, which we have to keep doing until the body dies. And hopefully a recognition, a seeing of aspects of our psychology and our biology that previously were not even being focused on, or not looked at, not understood for what they are, starts to happen. And as that happens, and as the concepts start getting applied automatically without you needing to do it, the thought arises, this is blame. Blame is actually disturbing my peace of mind. It's not serving a particularly useful purpose. Now, it might not stop in that moment, but the reason that it carries on is because we actually think it's worthwhile. We think that it is delivering something beneficial. Whereas if we keep in mind what is available to the human being, what is the happiness that the human being is looking for, it's peace of mind in daily life. Meaning this person walks in our line, pushes us off into the road. We may even get hit by a car on the elbow, let's say, and there is physical pain. And there's the understanding that this is life happening. The pain is unavoidable. The hatred towards the other that we normally would have, seeing them as a separate individual with control and volition, and then insisting that life should have turned out differently, is like asking the juicer to make toast for you. It's a narrative that actually makes no sense. How could that person have functioned differently if in that moment they were designed by life and in that moment they functioned that way? And as this understanding goes deeper and deeper, we start to realize that a lot of my resistance to life is simply irrational. Expecting someone that is designed by life to have certain characteristics, expecting them to function differently.
I remember one of Ramesh's lines on true forgiveness. He said, true forgiveness is forgiving yourself for wanting to forgive someone else for something they are supposed to have done. You see, because with forgiveness, it's still a subject forgiving an object. I forgive you. The dance of duality is still going on because I perceive myself separate from you and therefore I forgive you. But with the understanding, the question of forgiveness would not arise because nobody truly does anything. On the subject of conditioning, I was actually itching to talk about something at Ramesh's satsangs. Was a man who was a lawyer. His name was Rohit, wonderful man, he's no more. And he would wait for all the questions and answers to get over, and when he was convinced they were over, he would put his hand up to ask Ramesh a question. And whatever Ramesh would reply, he would give an answer. He was basically playing out in the courtroom. So Ramesh very rarely would get exasperated. And so he would say, okay, Rohit, you have the last word. So Rohit would say, "Sir, you telling me to have the last word means you have the last word." That was his conditioning, you see. Another important aspect of what Roger spoke about is we tend not to accept the basic duality of life. And our peace is to be found when we accept that the design of life is duality. Black and white, up and down, front and back, rich and poor, healthy children and handicapped children. And we ask, why did God create handicapped children? What harm have they done? And to whom? But nobody asks, why did God create healthy children? That is how we are. This design of life, pleasure one moment, pain the next, which is our own life's experience, if we just simply accepted that we do not know what the next moment brings, sometimes pain, sometimes pleasure, that acceptance itself is the doorway to peace. That is why Maharaj said, between the banks of pleasure and pain my life flows. Even someone like him said that. And when he was asked by a seeker about what happens the next moment, and his answer was, the expected seldom happens, the unexpected always does. That is our life's experience, not just a sage's life experience. Simple words, a simple acceptance of a simple way of seeing. And that is why he would say it's a big step when you stop running away from a painful situation. Because when you stop running away from a painful situation, that marks the turning away from the self, the lower self, the small s. Then you are there to face the pain. And that's a big turning point in the journey of life, because that marks the acceptance of the basic duality of life. That's what starts happening with this teaching. You accept more and more life as it happens. And to be comfortable with life as it happens is to be comfortable with death. Because the death is the death of the me with its sense of doership. And a smooth flow of life is life of the me without its sense of doership.
I'd like to repeat this earlier concept that Gautam, because it is so crucial to a change, a falling away of this self with the small s. So this acceptance of the duality of life, what it means in simple terms. Not that that was not simple terms, but the the acceptance starts by the simple recognition based on an investigation of your own, which is what's encouraged with any of the concepts put forward. They're all concepts that can be investigated for yourself. The understanding will not go very deep. if a concept is taken on as a belief, essentially. However, if you say, thank you for the pointer, a pointer is essentially a description. Let me see whether after I check out what the pointer is pointing at, whether I think that is an accurate description of what is. And this point is saying that the flow of life, which is what we are inevitably immersed in as human beings, the circumstance that will happen from the moment that we wake up in the morning to the moment we go to sleep at night, circumstance is always, only ever, either pleasure or pain. Circumstance is only either ever pleasurable or painful. It will be pleasurable if the circumstance is in line with your biological preferences that you didn't put in place, part of your genes and up-to-date conditioning, part of the body-mind organism. And the circumstance will be painful if the circumstance is out of line with your biological preferences. If your biological preference was, I like being shouted at, and someone shouts at you, it will be pleasurable. The reality is that most of us have a biological preference that says, I would like to be addressed with politeness or normalcy. So if someone shouts at us, especially if it has a thread of aggression in it, then it's not going to be in line with our biological preference, which means that interaction has to be experienced as painful. Now, pain and pleasure are not psychological. We don't have to think about it and label it as pleasurable or painful, which is another common misnomer. The baby cries when it's hungry. It doesn't have the concept, it doesn't have an intellect that can label the hunger as painful. The hunger is out of line with its biological preferences. It's painful, not because of a psychology, but because of the biology. So the flow of life is always going to be sometimes pleasurable and sometimes painful. It's our attachment to outcome that is somehow hoping that we can turn the duality of life that's not going to change because we want it to, into a life that is pleasure, 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 pleasure. That is what our attachment to outcome, which is part of our psychological identity that has been put in place by life, is actually trying to do. We are trying to control life, trying to control the other, trying to control ourselves, such that we function, the other functions, life functions, in a way that is pleasure, 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 and we believe that one day when we manage to achieve this feat that I'm sure I can do if I try hard enough, life will deliver me happiness. So our deeply ingrained attachment to outcome, which is the belief that my happiness is to be found when I get that job promotion, when I find my soulmate, when this, when that. That deeply ingrained belief in happiness through pleasure is actually based on a non-recognition of the simple fact that Gautam put forward, that the basic nature of the flow of life is interconnected opposites, duality. So the interconnected opposites mean they are codependent. Health and disease, wealth and poverty, hot and cold, big and small, up and down. And for us to insist on life being pleasure, pleasure, pleasure is an expectation that's going to lead into frustration, inevitably. So this is an example of why concepts have their value. The intellect is often underrated in the spiritual seeking because it's recognized that whenever I think about something, I think about it with the ingrained belief of doership and attachment to outcome. And so spiritual teachings that recognize this say, I can't give someone a concept Because as soon as I give them the concept, that is food for the belief in doership and attachment to outcome. So some teachings, because they are based on wisdom and intelligence, recognize I can't even tell someone that liberation is this or that. Because if I put forward a concept that says enlightenment, in practical terms, is the end of suffering, the doer that has an attachment to outcomes will say, thank you for that description. I now have a mission. I want that. It sounds beautiful. And I'm going to do it. I'm going to make it happen. Because that is the ingrained dynamic in humanity, spiritual teachings understand that for a vast range of seekers, we can't put forward concepts. There simply isn't a ripeness for them. However, at a certain point, the seeker has the potential, especially if the framework itself is continually undermining this movement of doership and attachment to outcome, continually pointing out that it is guilt, blame, pride, worry, and expectation. Expectation with the view that this will deliver happiness in daily living. It continually points out that that is the suffering, and what we're looking for is peace of mind, which is the absence of this suffering. With a framework that consistently harps on this, there is the potential for the intellect to start functioning in a way that aids the process. There will no doubt be doership and attachment to outcome that kicks in. But because we're being conditioned to see that, it will be seen when the doership and attachment to outcome kicks in within the spiritual seeking, which can be very powerful. So the concepts are being delivered so that we can investigate our own life experience, so that we have a tool. And when I say we investigate, remembering, what I'm really saying is investigation may happen because the human being has a structure based on its genes and up-to-date conditioning. So if the up-to-date conditioning includes information that allows a useful investigation to happen, it will happen. And this concept that's being put forward is the concept that says the flow of life, where we are forced to live, is always going to be a mix of pleasure and pain, and how much pleasure we are going to get in a particular day or in a whole lifetime is not in our control. And the same with the pain. And an adjunct to that concept is this concept, which is your happiness is not to be found in the flow of life. What it's saying, it's giving us really useful information. It says the peace of mind or the happiness, the enlightenment is not to be found in the flow of life. So we don't need the flow of life to be a particular way. We don't need the flow of life to be pleasure, 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 pleasure. It's highlighting that our happiness comes in the form of peace of mind, and peace of mind is always dependent on our attitude to the flow of life and not the flow of life itself. This is a distinction that when the doership and attachment to outcome are strong, this distinction between the flow of life and our attitude to the flow of life doesn't exist, because the two are so heavily merged because of the attachment to outcome, the craving after pleasure and the pushing away of pain. And so the pain and the suffering become merged as a singularity. And for this information to come in and say, do you realize that there is the flow of life, which is circumstance, which is always either pleasure or pain? And then there is this additional layer, which is your attitude to the flow of life. And the attitude, which is the attitude of doership and attachment to outcome, is invested in the flow of life being in line with our preferences all the time. And when life isn't in line with our preferences, it is felt as an attack on who I am. I feel incomplete. The freedom is to find that I exist. I exist irrespective of the circumstance. I am. So this access to this I amness also isn't available when the attachment is very strong. And as these dynamics start to diminish, we start to find that there is this core to the human being, this beingness, this existence that remains untouched regardless of the circumstance. So this pointer, your happiness is not to be found in the flow of life, is actually reminding us to drop back out of attachment to outcomes and realize, I am, even given this man just pushed me into the road and I got clipped by a car. I am, I exist. And if we drop into that being, a smile often comes onto our face. And that's the remembrance.
I'd like to add something here. What I think happens naturally from this point on is that one actually, in the flow of one's life, one does realize that pleasures are just cheats because they come and go. But with this understanding, you are so happy when pleasures do not arise. It reminds me of Ramesh's words, which I will never forget. He suffered from migraine for 30 years with no cure. And one day, he woke up and it was gone, never to come back. And he said, at that point, I realized that the absence of pain is the greatest pleasure. And I think we can all relate to that. If God came to you and said, I will give you a life where I will take away all your pain from this point on, till your last breath, but not even one moment of pleasure, many of us who are suffering would probably take it. So our pursuit and quest for pleasures undergoes a shift because we are resting more in being. We are not relying on happenings as we used to earlier. And then it is that peaceful day that you look forward to the most, when nothing really happens as such. And if someone asks you, at least in Bombay where I come from, you are asked very often, what's the news today? And my answer is no news. You feel so good. This reminds me of a joke. Not a joke, it's actually, I don't know if I said it last year, but I like it a lot, so I'll say it again. I knew someone who owned race horses. And he had a friend who would name the horses. He would go to this one friend, and like the friend would give the name like Purple Rose and Black Beauty and all that. So he acquired a new horse, and he asked the friend that come up with a name. So the friend said, I'll let you know tomorrow morning, let me sleep over it. So he said the next morning, I've got the perfect name for the horse. So my friend was very eager. He said, what's the name? He said, Bad News. So my friend was shocked. He said, are you mad? How can you call a horse Bad News? He said, because no news is good news, but bad news travels fast. But one's life becomes a life of no news. The peace, equanimity, tranquility acceptance of what is, acceptance of people for who they are, the way they have been made, for oneself, is a life of peace.
There's a microphone here. I realize we've spoken for quite some time. So anyone who would like to ask a question or provide some of their own input can do so. And if you don't, we'll talk for more time.
Hi, I would like to ask Gautam if you could tell us a few stories with Ramesh. I know the one with the couple. They went to Ramesh. You're right. The one I like that, and the one with the taxi driver. You were saying, but I would like to hear more if you can.
If something arises, I'll interrupt Roger. I would actually take this opportunity to share what for me was fascinating was to see the last 3 months of Ramesh's life. That was a real privilege for me. Because I saw the teaching play out. And some instances, like his wife died 3 months before him, at the age of 90. She just passed away one night. And so the next morning, 3-4 of us went to offer our condolences, you could say. And he was sitting in the bedroom, looking out of the window, rocking on his chair. And I just didn't feel words were needed, at such a moment. So I just put my head on his lap. That's all I could think of doing. And he just patted my head and said, okay, it's okay, don't worry. And I was saying, what? I mean, aren't you going to feel this loss? And I was so used to, like we all are, of a display of loss, of attachment and grieving. And the first thing he said was, can you imagine God gave us 58 years together? His first thought was a thought of gratitude for the time he spent with his wife together. I'm not sure the exact number of years, but it was a lot. That statement for me was really living the teaching. That's what I started seeing in his last days, And a lot of things played out. I went to the ICU. He was in the hospital for some time. So I asked him, I said, how are you feeling? And he looked around. He said, I may not like being here, but witnessing is happening. There was no involvement in the situation beyond that. And when he was shifted to a hospital room, a few of us visited him. And I was in the room, and then I excused myself, and he said, no, you wait here, wait for 2-3 minutes. And a couple from the States had come, so they were allowed in, and they were quite distraught to see him in the hospital. And so then after 2-3 minutes were up, I said, I think we should leave. And they were very keen on sharing their problem with Ramesh. And actually I was quite taken aback because he was in no condition to, but maybe their situation was so overwhelming that they started talking to him that this happened and this and what do we do and all that. And then I saw the sage's compassion, which I have only read about. He was totally attentive, listened to them in spite of his failing health, and said what he had to say. That was very touching for me, So many incidents like this, which show just ordinary stuff, nothing very fanciful, just an ordinary man living an extraordinary life. That is what the gift of his passing was to me. It was the most gracious passing.
Namaste, sir. Namaste again, sir. Sir, when I say I am not the doer, and when you say about this that this is a concept, this is not true. This I don't understand. This is not true. This I don't understand.
So I often repeat this because it's actually quite a subtle point, and it's only relevant really quite far down the seeking line, actually, because spiritual teachings for a while work on the fact that a seeker will believe what is said. But at some point we really do need to find that, and it does that because an ingrained belief is there, and so it will throw in the opposite in order for this belief to be uprooted by another belief, right? Because the belief is so deeply ingrained that it really requires something equally strong. So what we find is that spiritual teachings will give us certain concepts to uproot the existing beliefs. But that doesn't really give us complete freedom, doesn't give us much freedom actually, but it's part of the process. To replace one belief with another belief just means you have a changing self-identity. And this is why Ramana would say, use this thorn to remove the thorn which is embedded in your thumb. Now, a thorn refers to a concept. When a concept becomes embedded, that imagery is meaning where someone believes the concept as if it is absolute truth. So that is the process of belief, is when the intellect believes a concept, which is a description, right, as absolute truth. When the system believes a concept as absolute truth, it becomes a belief. Belief is what keeps us disconnected from our own beingness. And I should do this, I shouldn't do that, are a set of beliefs. Why do we think I should do this and I shouldn't do that? When we look deeply, it's because if I do this, I might get love from the other. And I believe that my happiness is to be found in love from the other. I shouldn't do that because I might not get love from the other, or if I shouldn't do that because I'll get punished by society. All of this is pleasure and pain. So I was talking about the deeply ingrained belief that my happiness is to be found in pleasure and pain. And that deeply ingrained belief then forces us to act a certain way. So a teaching will put forward a concept. Your happiness is not to be found in the flow of life, not to be found in pleasure or pain. As a concept, it's quite harmless. In fact, it is very powerful. Our way of thinking will often turn that concept into a belief. So, let's go back to this analogy. Use this thorn to uproot the thorn embedded in your thumb. I am the body is a deeply ingrained belief that prevents us from recognizing the fullness of what we are as a human being. So, I am the body is an ingrained belief that covers up our the consciousness aspect. So Nisargadatta, in his teaching, would put in the concept, you are not the body, you are consciousness. The deeply ingrained belief is a thorn embedded in the thumb. Right? That's the belief. Use this thorn, which is the concept you are not the body, to uproot the belief that you are the body. And then he went further, however, be sure to throw both thorns away. On the recognition that is what is likely to happen through the spiritual process is that we will uproot the belief that I am the body and replace it with the belief I am awareness. And we see this a lot in spiritual seeking. You just need to log into Facebook and go onto a few non-dual sites, and there are all sorts of proclamations. That's a belief that has set in. So what is being pointed out when I say whatever is which is what Ramesh would say, whatever is put forward in the talks is a concept. Whatever has ever been said or written about by any sage is a concept, not the truth. It goes on, the only truth in the manifestation is the impersonal sense of I am. Now, that concept to me is so important. I don't expect it to be relevant to someone until it's relevant. It is so important. That itself is a concept. The concept that says whatever I say is a concept, whatever has ever been said or written down is a concept. The only truth in the manifestation is the impersonal sense of I am. It's a concept in a spiritual teaching. I think it's a very powerful and very important concept. But it in itself is a concept. But if we look at and say, why is this concept included in the teaching? What it's really trying to point out is don't get caught up in the description. Don't believe yourself to be this or that. But know yourself through being it prior to thinking. Know yourself to be what you are. So the concept, whatever is said, whatever is written down is a concept, not the truth. Now, it doesn't mean it's not valuable. Spiritual concepts are very valuable. Don't turn them into beliefs. The only truth in the manifestation is the impersonal sense of I am. So what it's doing is it's pointing us somewhere. It's saying be that I am.
Sir, can you please give examples or two examples of these two concepts if they turn into beliefs and then they hinder my peace? The first belief, if it happens, is that one only, that I'm saying that I am not the doer. And the second is, as you said, that the only truth is impersonal, my impersonal beingness. So when they turn into beliefs, when these two concepts turn into beliefs, can you give examples related to both of them so that I understand that, okay, that is how they will take away my peace?
So if the concept was the spiritual, the teaching says whatever happens in life is a happening and not your doing. And it supports that by pointing out that the human being is a result of two factors, genes and up-to-date conditioning. That's what this biological and psychological instrument is in this moment. And those factors were not in my control. Therefore, I function, things happen, but there isn't someone as a doer that can claim that they orchestrated how they functioned. Right? So that's what is meant by I am not the doer. Now, if someone just goes round living life and repeating to themselves, I am not the doer, you are not the doer, it is someone owning that concept, having turned it into a belief, thinking that that thinking is somehow going to be helpful. It might be at the beginning. At some point we need to realize that I need to see deeply the non-doership in life. Right? And someone asked me the other day something to do with non-doership. The answer is so simple, is because it's so simple that they go on to more and more questions. Non-doership is the recognition that hunger, the urge of hunger happens. You didn't create the feeling of hunger. It happened. That is the same for our thinking, for the emotions, for the speaking, for the functioning in life. At some point, awareness and the intellect needs to land on an observation of life such that it clicks. I simply cannot be the doer. And in that moment, the understanding has shifted much deeper than the intellect. In that moment, the belief in personal doership has substantially weakened because it's been seen. Like really seen for oneself, it will arise as an insight. Because at first we might say, yes, fair enough, the hunger, the feeling of hunger arises, the heart beats, I don't do the beating of the heart, but my thinking is a different kettle of fish. As the investigation happens, where I'm suggesting that your thinking is not a different kettle of fish, it feels different. Thinking feels like I am doing it, much more so than the beating of the heart. That feeling is a bit deceptive. We need to go beyond that with an investigation. So if we can deeply see, then you don't need to go around saying, I'm not the doer. It's known. It will no longer be an impotent belief. In the same with the impersonal sense of I am. If someone says, I am not the body, I am being. Like, be being. Which is not an instruction to a doer to do being. It's that at some point, the contemplation that is happening as a result of being exposed to certain teachings might flourish, might flower as a recognition that if I keep thinking that I am impersonal sense of I am, that thinking is actually getting in the way of me being, which is a dimension prior to thinking, you could say.
That means I would not need to believe. I would not need to believe.
No, you can get rid of the last 2/3 of the word and just be.
Please repeat, sir.
You are right. You would not need to believe that you are. You would know in the moment, in any moment, if you drop into your beingness, I am. It is self-confirming prior to any need for thought.
Yeah, yes. Thank you, sir.
Hi. Okay, so one thing I'm perceiving here is, and you've just used a term, along with understanding, right? Because when I walk out that door, when we're going to go and have supper, etc., at most, for now, what I'm getting is that an understanding, which I did not do, an additional understanding would help with some form of flourishing over time. Is there a recognition in the framework that you're presenting that there are such flourishings that can happen like this to a depth hitherto unknown for the individual, such that the understanding would go beyond an intellectual level and be, shall we say, that much more integrated?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the framework talks about this very much. Would you mind if I don't? Do you have an answer that you would like to put forward?
No, you're doing a good job.
Okay, so information, as far as I'm concerned, is very important. It starts off as a concept being delivered. The concept is a description. So, for example, happiness for the human being is available in the form of continuous, unbroken peace of mind. Concept put forward. And there's thousands of concepts that I can write. You know, the flow of life is always a mix of sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain. Concept. Life will be pleasurable if circumstance is in line with your biological preferences. Concept. So all of these things are concepts. They're descriptions. And your intellect can understand the concept. So if I say God exists, that is a concept. If I say God does not exist, that is a concept. For every concept, there is a opposite concept. So it doesn't mean. So let's. I'm just trying to, because it's an important question, and the framework, as I put it forward, is a conceptual framework. It needs to be understood intellectually. The concept needs to be understood, which means, what is the concept saying? Right? So someone might say, I understand what the concept says intellectually, but to be honest, I have no experience that this concept is true. But I understand what you're saying intellectually. So that's a great start, because when you leave, there is at least, well, hopefully, we don't know how it sits, but potentially the concept that says my happiness is to be found in the form of peace of mind. And peace of mind is the absence of suffering. Those are two concepts. Suffering arises in the form of guilt, blame, pride, so on. Concept. Blame is hatred towards the other for delivering pain and seeing the other as the doer. You as a separate independent did this, you hurt me, I hate you, you should have done it differently. It's the narrative, more or less, of blame. So those are all concepts. The teaching says, take the concept, don't believe it, investigate it for yourself based on your own life experience. As you investigate the concept based on your own life experience, now you can't force life to line up with the concept you want to investigate, so we're not saying go out and investigate blame today. Maybe you'll be lucky and there's not going to be a circumstance. So you don't need to, you go through life and blame happens in a particular moment. And then the concept which you understood intellectually might kick in and say, this is the blame that was being spoken about. Is it an attitude to the other that sees them as the doer? says they should have and they could have acted differently, says that the pain that they delivered to me is an attack on who I am. Is this blame disturbing my peace of mind? So that is a set of thinking that can happen if the intellectual understanding of the concept is in place. As it happens time and time again, throughout your day, without you needing to have an agenda, just live your life, and the concept will start seeing the blame, the pride, the worry, the expectation to outcomes. And each time we can put a tick next to the concept. If our I'm confident that if you investigate your life with clarity, that you'll be putting lots of ticks next to the concept, because there are a set of concepts that stem from an investigation, a clarity about daily life as it pertains to happiness for the human being. So as you put the tick next to it more and more, the understanding is going deeper and deeper and deeper, until and as it's going deeper, what it's doing is it's actually uprooting the opposite misunderstanding that is deeply ingrained in the body. And at a certain point, the understanding clicks in a way which we call insight. And it's like, I see. Life is happening. I am part of the happening of life. I am being lived by life. I simply cannot be the doer of my thoughts, of my actions. The other is the same.
So it's gone beyond the intellect at that moment. Oof.
Exactly.
I can add something here. You know, if you're familiar with mantras, right? What happens is, if one is constantly chanting a mantra for days, months, years, the mantra japa becomes an ajapa jap, which means you no longer have to consciously practice it, it just arises within you on its own. So supposing a concept like everything is God's will is lived by as a concept, one day you'll just see something happen in your life, which most likely you don't like, and this understanding arises simultaneously. That is the flourish. You know, that is the internalization, and then the switch happens, the ajapa jap. And then your breath is chanting that all the time, not consciously doing it.
We're coming to the end of the time, so we'll take one or two more questions, but feel free to come back over the following days, where we'll go through the framework in more detail, and there will be more time for question and answers, because that's where the framework gets elaborated on, in a sense, through the questions.
Thank you, Roger. And I have a question about oneness. During Advaita retreat, intensive retreat, I got strong experience. It was like a glimpse, and I took it for myself like a gift of universe, like a free sample, to feel this natural vibration, to feel unconditional love, to feel dissolution, and all of this stuff. But you know, recently I watched your video actually when you describe it like 5 times to Ramesh, and Ramesh always told you, Roger, it's experience.
Don't worry about it.
Yes, don't worry about this. It's experience. So now I have a question. This sample of oneness, is it real experience? Is it experience to bring us this new condition, maybe, as I feel it? Did you find final answer for that? Or maybe Ramesh told you something else about this? Why we have this experience? because it's really like, it looks like a sample, like a great gift. And yeah, I think maybe it's my fantasy, but I feel that something shifted in me after that.
So my view on this subject is very specific, and I think it's a hugely important topic. In fact, I will dedicate a whole satsang to why we become convinced that it's a state of oneness that is liberation, because there is freedom from suffering in that oneness state when it happens as a peak experience. And I speak from my own experience of those oneness experiences happening regularly and continuously until a certain insight happened in me because of what Ramesh said in response to my description of the oneness experience, that made it clear to me. And I didn't, even having heard the concept, it didn't really hit home what the concept about peace of mind in daily living really meant. I heard it, I said yes, but I still thought that will come through oneness. And so my seeking was still for oneness, actually. And when Ramesh gave me his answers, at some point I actually thought, well, maybe he doesn't know. Maybe he hasn't had that experiential oneness state which matches so well the Advaita teachings from the top-down perspective, the awareness, you are not the body. And it kept niggling at me until one day there was a flash that got, I have an expectation, and expectation is part of the suffering, and I could feel the suffering when the craving for it to come back on a continuous, unbroken basis was there. And there was a click. I have an expectation of what enlightenment is. My guru made it very clear to me, Roger, that was just an experience. Don't worry about it. For 3 weeks, I couldn't palate it. I was convincing myself he didn't know. And it was my way, unconsciously, of not hearing what was really important to hear. When the suffering became intense enough, I realized there is an attachment to this oneness. What if he's right? This was the thought. Because up to that point, there was no consideration that he could be right. I just was sure he misunderstood or he didn't know. When I saw that the expectation of what enlightenment was, I saw that it was an expectation of oneness, because when that experience happened, I was sure that this is enlightenment. This is what Ramana Maharshi experiences. This is what Nisargadatta experienced. That's why Nisargadatta kept saying, I am not the body, I am awareness in which the whole universe arises, because that's what those oneness experiences demonstrate. And it's like, oh my God, there's no thinking in it. It's just a change. And we think that that is reality, right? Because we've been primed to think that. And we go, the illusion of duality, the illusion of separation has fallen away, and now I know reality. And we're not saying it is in the experience, in the oneness experience, which many people would say is not an experience because subject-object relationship fell away and there's no thinking. There is in that experience, Advaita Vedanta is manifest, essentially. Everything that we have read is there in its pristine beauty. And I was convinced that that was enlightenment, and now that it had happened that way, it's just a matter of time for it to set in such that there is no person living life, not no one as a doer living life, but no human individual at all, and there is just this formless awareness, aware of everything. The craving after it made it clear there is an expectation. What if I'm wrong? What if he's right? This is the thing, what if he's right? And that's when it all clicked. Enlightenment is the end of suffering. Enlightenment is continuous, unbroken peace of mind, which is the end of suffering. And I thought, what if this continuous, unbroken peace of mind is available without the oneness experience? And because this happened to be one of the last, misunderstandings. And so this insight was, it's not about oneness. And in that instant, the oneness experience stopped. They didn't happen again. The subtle oneness, when we become aware of our own consciousness, in which the experience of life very much happens. Like Gautam says, you cannot have the experience of another person when they are outside of your consciousness. So that subtle oneness was there many years before this experience and continues to be there, but it doesn't negate the human being living their life as a human being with a personality, with preferences. However, that other oneness experience where there was a big collapse of what we know as manifestation can so easily be mistaken. So what is the purpose of it? The purpose, in my view, is to deliver an alternate perspective to life that shakes up a lot of what might need to be shaken. It gives a contrast. Now, I would say that experience is no different an experience to this experience, the experience that most people have of life. They're both experience, they're both subjective, although the oneness experience feels like it is not subjective because it doesn't feel like it is being perceived from the body-mind organism. Yet, when we put a bit of critical thinking to it, when we examine the experience, we realize it is a subjective experience. All experience is subjective, it has to be. I was very lucky that in that oneness experience, my hands went up over my eyes, because the experience, as it constructed itself, felt like it wasn't happening through the body-mind organism. It felt like awareness was out here somewhere. And not only it was out here, but it was everywhere. Luckily, it was my destiny for the hands to go up over the eyes. And what happened was the vista got interfered with by the fingers and the hand. I didn't know the significance of that at the time. When I started investigating that later on, I realized that this experience that felt like it was known from impersonal awareness was still being had through the body-mind organism. So I'm very passionate about the fact that because these peak experiences happen, and they happen when we're exposed to top-down non-dual teachings, and do not get me wrong, please, this is not a criticism of those, because I see all teachings working hand in hand with each other. They serve a very important purpose at breaking up certain identification with thoughts, identification with the body, but they're part of a process, and we need to go past it. And I see that what Ramesh started to bring forward, which was inspired by the confusion that was put in front of him by seekers that had been on a different phase of the seeking, is a new form of Advaita. So Ramesh would say, this is Advaita, this is very much Advaita. But it's Advaita from a daily living perspective. It's not focusing so much on the formless awareness aspect. And it's not better, it's just appropriate at a certain time. And so I hope that we get to discuss this topic in more detail over the coming days.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll make this the last question, if that's okay with people. And please feel free to come back.
I'll just tell you something on a lighter note about oneness. There was this young boy who was following my talks, and he was not enjoying his work at all. He was always criticizing, complaining, and his manager was also not happy. So he called me up one day and he said, I lost my job. So I said, how did it happen? He said, because I was so demotivated that every day I was going late. So on Friday when I went late, my boss asked me, why are you late? And he said, I am not late, Brahman is late. And so he lost his job. So he called me that, what do I do now? And my parents don't know. So I said, I don't know what you do, but I'll tell you what you should not do. Don't tell your dad Brahman lost his job. Because when you get lost, then the practical aspects of life start collapsing. So it has to be integrated.
Yeah, like new condition.
Yes, the integration is essential.
Thanks to your teaching. I'm not a doer. I have enough experience to see that, and I don't expect any oneness tomorrow or today. It's happened, and I don't expect any.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
And if the peace is there, you won't have any interest in oneness tomorrow or the day after.
Yeah,
And if the experience comes and it's profound and interesting, you'll enjoy it.
yeah, it was like a gift, really. Very similar to your description. I found it later.
Uh-huh. Good.
Thank you for your pointers. Thank
Pleasure.
you for the conceptual framework. I particularly enjoy conceptual frameworks, but I identify strongly with my mind at this point still.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could share one of the struggles that I will investigate, as you offer, it will take investigation, because when I hear destiny, my mind says that's utter determinism, and that is based on understanding time as linear, and that's based on understanding separateness. So I'll investigate that, but where my question arises, it arises from Gautam's beautiful sharing of that story of the last 3 months, and the kind of being and acting that came from this teaching that you saw embodied in your teacher. And so when you asked us to be clear about our intention, my intention arises from my experience, one moment, an experience of oneness, and the intention that arose from that is an intention of living in this realm of manifestation in ways that do not increase harm. And I could call that peace of mind, because I think peace and mind, if you understand them in non-duality, then it can give rise to actions that cause less harm in this realm of manifestation of separateness. I wonder what you would comment on that, I guess.
This is ideal for Gautam, right?
I think it's actually a very important truth, because when Maharaj was asked this question, he said, this is precisely the point. Forget about loving others. Just do not harm another. That's all I ask of you. That is living the teaching. And the way you have put it is actually, and of course by word harm we are not referring to by actions. The sheer fact of accusing someone of doership is a form of harm. So do not harm another is what he said. Nisargadatta. Nisarg means the natural state. And Ramesh would say the same thing. That is why when the subject of love was brought up, he would say on similar lines, forget love. Do not hate another. Because when you do not hate another, there is no other to hate. And when there is no other to hate, there is no other apart from me to hate. And when there is no other apart from me to hate, then all there is consciousness. Which in one sentence he summed up as, love is the absence of separation, and separation is the absence of love.
I'll investigate this.
Thank you.